Hey there, and welcome to Create a Place podcast. I'm Kristina York, co-founder and principal at Create & Co. Architecture and Interior Design Studio. I'll also be your guide to workplace design, culture, and well-being. We've got a lot of great guests coming up, so grab your coffee, tea, or cocktail and pull up a seat for some great conversations and some valuable takeaways. Hey guys, welcome to Create a Place podcast. I'm here with Dr. Tracy Brower. She's the VP of Steelcase Workplace Insights, has written several books that we are going to touch on a little bit, and is also a major contributor to Forbes. So we are excited to have her here. We are at Coronet Global in DC right now, our annual convention, and we are excited to be talking about the workplace and what's ahead for us. So thank you for coming, Tracy, and taking some time out of the day to meet with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, great. So I know we're going to dive into your books and all, but I think I just wanted to start, just tell us a little bit about you. What's your background? What got you to what you're doing? And, what are some of your passions surrounding that?
Yeah, I love workplace and culture, and for me it's kind of about people, right? My PhD is in the sociology of work, so how we affect our work, how it affects us. I just think that's fascinating stuff. All the things we do are still about people and our patterns of interaction and patterns of behavior. My very first boss out of college was the manager in charge of organizational dynamics and organizational development and culture, and so I think it got me hooked right from the beginning. He was an amazing leader, and it kind of played to something I was already interested in, and then built passion over time.
It's really great to have a good leader, that inspired you, to go after this topic and really get, dive into those studies. So how can a leader be, an influence in, the workplace and influencing how an employee, can be productive, can feel good about what they're doing? Talk to me about that, the sociology of that piece.
Yeah, I feel like this is such a pivotal piece. And I always say, we're all leaders in our own right, no matter what role we're in, because the number one way we learn is by watching other people, listening to other people, experiencing other people. So how we show up is all about how we're leading, no matter what our formal role. But I think we're in this really funky time, and my perspective will be a little bit counterintuitive or maybe a little provocational.
Good. We're here to be real about this. We want to know what's really going on.
You can tell me if you agree with that after I say this. But I think the pendulum has swung so far toward you do you and show up when you want. And, we appreciate your work, but just do it however you want to. And I actually think that that's really counterproductive for people. And I really believe that leaders do us a huge service when they have high expectations, when they want us available in our brain in the room, whether it's, literally or figuratively, when they're counting on us, when they expect us to add value. I had this experience with a Gen Z that I coach, and he was starting a role out of college, and his company was supposed to be in the office 2 days a week. So that's great. That's their expectation. All good. So he was having one of his first meetings with his boss, and she said, well, yeah, we're in the office 2 days a week, but you just come whenever you want.
Oh.
And I was like, that's terrible. I know the average person might have said, no, that's a good idea. You're given lots of space for well-being and work life and all that kind of thing. But I just think that there's something about maybe being too chill, that we want to communicate. I want you involved. I want the value. I believe you're going to bring value. And therefore, we expect people to show up. Even if they're showing up virtually, we expect people to deliver. We expect people to follow through. And holding people accountable actually is really good for our esteem, because we all have an instinct to matter.
Sure.
So I think it's this pendulum where it's it needs to be balanced somewhere in the middle, where we're giving people space and appropriate respect for work life and lots of opportunities for, well-being. And we expect people to bring value, and we're communicating that we value what they're delivering.
Yeah, I love that. And it's
it's kind of, parenting, if you don't give them a little bit of guardrails, it can
Yes.
fall off the wheels, and I heard someone say recently, well, if you ask an employee what they want, or if you just ask somebody, hey, what do you want for dinner tonight? Chocolate.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, is that good for you to have every night? So it's our job in the workplace to kind of say, no, like you said, here is the expectation.
Yes.
And so you have something to aspire to, and you do have some of those guardrails and those boundaries that are healthy
Yes.
for not just you and not just the company, but for everybody. And I really love it. So I do agree. And I think some people probably wouldn't, but I think it is the truth. I think you have to, as a business leader, you have to be clear, and that's the key.
Yes.
You have to be clear in what your expectations are, and be, a good communicator, so that then I can understand why you need me there, or why you need me to, to be, to be functioning at that level. So I love that.
Yeah, and that why, I mean, like, we want to talk a little bit about happiness and what drives happiness. That's a really big part of driving happiness. It's that why at kind of an individual level, like my why and why I'm working, but it's also related to my team, how I'm making an impact on my team and the organization, right? So when we communicate that why and that purpose and that clarity, that makes a huge difference for people. That's actually really interesting. Can I go off on a little tangent?
No, I was just going to dive into that, but maybe, yes, please.
There's some brand new research that globally people are really anxious and afraid. Like, we know well-being levels are really struggling in terms of rises in depression, anxiety, all kinds of things. But also, there's new global research that people are afraid. They're afraid of all kinds of things, from climate change to geopolitical issues to information wars to nuclear wars, and their trust in leaders has declined. And so people are coming to the workplace with uncertainty or anxiety. And so I think work has this really important role to play in terms of stability and continuity and routine. And where I got started on this tangent is you were talking about, right, clear expectations with leaders, and leaders who can provide that level of clarity. And that is actually, I think, really stabilizing for people. When it feels like everything is going on around us and we're at the point of overwhelm, when somebody's clear about why we're here and what we're expected to do and how we'll be contributing, that's actually pretty empowering.
It's that one place of normalcy, if you will, that, it's, yes, I can do that. And by the end of the day, I will have not thought about all these other things, right? Because I've been focused on my work and I have a good product, and now I can be happy going home. And so that is part of the happiness. So tell me about the happiness and the book, and how that all ties in, to what your passion is here, teaching people how to be happier, finding that joy somewhere in all of this.
And I always say happiness is really nuanced, right? It's not just bonbons and butterflies, and it's not toxic positivity. There really is a very nuanced kind of definition to true happiness, true joy. And when we're feeling happiest, we're usually immersed, like we lose track of time. We're just immersed in what we're doing. And we're dedicated, like we really care about finishing the thing and doing the thing and following up and doing our best. There's also a vitality component to happiness. Like, we feel energized by our work. We're interested in putting energy into our work. And there's a mattering component. Like, we feel like the work matters. We feel like we matter. So I like to think about those in terms of defining what it is we're going after anyway. And work can be a substantive part of that. As I said, we all have this instinct to matter. So it's a little bit of how I'm thinking about happiness. And how I got connected with this topic is I kind of looked around and said, work has a really bad rap, like it's a grind, it's a salt mine, the less work, the better,
There's no balance in this work-life balance thing, so I can't be happy and work at the same time.
Exactly. Like, the way to be happy is to do as little work as possible, right? Bed rotting and lazy girl jobs and quiet quitting and all those terrible trends. So I wanted to kind of think about, how do we reset that? Like, how do we reimagine work? Not so that it's perfect, because, nothing is ever perfect, but how do we redefine, how do we reimagine what work can be for us and how we can create the conditions for happiness?
I so agree with that. how do you respond to sort of the naysayers on the other side who say your happiness shouldn't depend on your work, or maybe you just need the job, and you're not going to find happiness in it? What's your advice to kind of that group of people?
Yeah, this is great. I mean, I always think it's a good business leader that gets quickly to, Tracy, first of all, there's the fluffy argument, right? Like,
right.
This is pretty fluffy. Interestingly, happiness has been absolutely researched to the hilt. And when people are happier, they perform better. They tend to stick around longer. They tend to be more physically healthy. They tend to have a more substantive connection to the culture and impact on the culture.
Sure.
So there's some really good business benefits to happiness. So that's one aspect of it. I think another aspect of it is the idea that, work shouldn't be our only sense of happiness.
Right.
And there's a wonderful concept of dimensionality. Like we have the greatest levels of well-being when we have dimensionality. And so work absolutely can be a source of joy and happiness. One source. Hopefully it's not the only source. Hopefully it's also like family and friends and relationships and community and the art stuff that we do and the volunteer stuff that we do and the community stuff that we do, right? Not to the point of overload, but to the point that we have other things in our life that are actually mattering to us and offering this idea of dimensionality.
Yeah.
But it's also really healthy to get a sense of meaning and identity from our work.
Yeah.
It's like, I think we have to, the pendulum is swung on that one as well, right? Like, we don't want to identify too much with our work. But in reality, work is a place where we feel seen. It's a place where we get meaning. It's a place where we can express our capabilities and talents and make a contribution to other people. And all of those things are correlated with happiness.
Dimensionality. That's a good term. I like that. And it's really so true, even if that's not your source, it shouldn't be necessarily your source, but, understanding that if you are, productive enough, or you do feel fulfilled enough in it, that it can be part of that. It's all part of that package, right? It's like, well, at least I'm not miserable at work, or at least I find some kind of fulfillment in there, that when I go home, I am not angry with the world, and I had a client one time that just came to us and they said, I just want to send my people home in a better state than what they came in. I thought, well, that's brilliant. I mean, who says that, though? I mean, how many employers are out there saying that? And I think, like you're saying, the pendulum is swinging, and I think there's a lot more leadership that's now recognizing that I can't just treat these, my employees as human capital. I need to treat them as people, and they are very well-rounded, and they have a lot of other things to deal with. And COVID really revealed so much of that,
It did.
So many things that never really came to the surface, aging parents, young ones at home, and so many things. And I think that can be having fulfillment at work can actually help offset some of those things that you're just having to deal with all the time at home.
Completely.
If you're in an environment that allows you to do that, if you have leadership that supports you, right?
Yeah, so true. And I think about, as I'm hearing you talk, we talk a bit about you might have an extractive model where you're just pulling everything you can out of somebody, and then they go home at the end of the day and they're just completely set, right? Like, that's just not what we're talking about, right? What if people could go home feeling even better than they did when they walked in the morning, right?
Exactly.
And I think the other side of that, and you talked about this in one of your original questions, is I think we also can take the pressure off of ourselves. Like, work doesn't have to be like, the deepest, most amazing experience every single day. It's really okay if it's about buying groceries and putting dinner on the table. That's okay too. And so we can have kind of ups and downs, right? Like, you'll have ebbs and flows in the week. You have ebbs and flows in the day. Sometimes you have ebbs and flows in the seasons of life, right? Like, there'll be points in life where you're threading the needle and connecting the dots and trying to keep it all together, and other points when you won't have quite that intensity either in work or in life. But it's okay if every single minute isn't fulfilling. And I think there's a concept.
Grace to yourself.
Yes,
right?
exactly. Exactly. It's like you can have it all, just not all at once.
Right.
So, and I love the concept that all work has dignity. So you may not be solving world peace or world hunger, but you're doing something that matters to somebody. And there's an importance to that no matter what kind of work it is.
Yeah, I agree with that. And before we started today, we were talking a little bit about, diving into kind of college age and like younger folks. So, let's talk a little bit about that. Is that like telling them it's okay if you just really like to make a really good cup of coffee? Maybe being a barista is your jam,
Totally.
Embrace it, love it, do it well. And then, then you have the rest of the time to do your other, life things. So, maybe that's part of that. And so, I don't know, talk about that for just a minute, what your thoughts are around, getting to folks a little bit earlier than waiting until they've already worked for 10 years and now they're trying to figure out how they balance everything.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me, no matter how old people are, I frequently will say, well, what do you want to be when you grow up, right? Like we have the opportunity to reinvent and recreate our careers more today than ever before. So
absolutely.
Right? So I think a lot of times, the intensity we feel or the pressure we feel is because we're trying to do it all right all the time. Find the right job, find the best job, find the most meaningful job. But if we just kind of do the next thing that makes sense to us and say yes to the thing that seems really interesting, and know that we can continue to evolve our careers, that's a big deal. I'm going to be a barista, and then after that I'm going to be a vet assistant, and oh my gosh, to be a landscape designer over time. And there's lots of different things many of us are interested in, and it's okay if those kind of evolve over time. Interesting. Different generation. I always think life stage is actually more meaningful in some ways than like your chronological age.
Yes.
So think like early life stage, mid life stage, later life stage. Early life stage, the number one thing that people say they want from their work is learning and growth and the opportunity to build social capital and kind of get on the radar screen, whatever radar screen that is.
Right.
Midlife stage, people tend to prioritize performance, efficiency, effectiveness, get in, get out, do the daycare dash at 5, the elder care dash at 5, even if get in, get out is a virtual role.
Right.
And then later stage, people tend to prioritize leaving a legacy and being part of organizational memory and mentoring others. And we all care about all of those things, but we prioritize them differently depending on our life stage. So I think that's something too, right? Like whatever role you're going to do, whatever work you're going to do, think really hard about like what do you really want? What makes you happy? What gives you energy? What tends to be a good overlap with what you love to do and what you have to do? It'll never be a perfect overlap, but as much as possible.
Sure.
And do that.
And there's so much more opportunity today, like you said, more than ever, to be able to kind of create your own position. And, just thinking about the workforce now versus, what it was even 10 years ago, and folks are going to be in the workforce longer. They have more opportunities, and they might not even have the job right now that exists, that you're going to work in 10 years, which things are just changing so crazy. Who would have thought I'd be, doing podcasting 10 years ago. So I can fully embrace that. You can change your career at any point, and at 50 I decided I'm going to do something a little different.
Way to go. Well, I think it
Here
can
we
be
are.
episodic, right? Like you can do a thing and then I don't know, maybe you take a little time and then you do another thing, and like we think about it differently. Or organizations who maybe think about more gig work within the organization, like how can we give people lots of movement and growth opportunities within the organization, not just in a sort of typical career path. So I think the biggest thing is how do we explore with people what's most meaningful and interesting for them, because it's not always up and more in terms of our locus of control. Depending on our life stage, we may prioritize different things.
And our goals may be lateral and not, vertical. And so that can be different too.
Yes.
I love that. So these are all good, constructs and options. And so we want to give some tangible advice to leadership. What can they take away, from learning about this or just from this conversation to say, here's some tangible points that you can do or that you can, enact now. that might change the trajectory, of how those employees feel.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, some of the things are just really kind of elementary stuff, but we can always be reminded, right? When we model the way and take care of our own well-being and make choices that are empowering for our life, we pave the way for others, right? When we're empathetic and ask questions and we're attentive, all of those things help employees to feel seen and feel like they're uniquely valued, and we can be then specific about how we provide learning and growth opportunities, all those good things that we kind of know are leadership 101, but that always require effort, right? But just thinking about happiness, purpose is kind of a big deal, and we talked a little bit about that. So remind people, what are we setting out to do, and how do they matter to that?
How they play into that, how they, how they influence that.
Exactly. Providing learning and growth opportunities is huge. Letting people try things that are adjacent to their swim lane, or stretch, or, try something that they haven't totally figured out, right? Those learning and growth opportunities absolutely move the needle on happiness. Another thing that we haven't talked about is just leaders helping people to feel connected with each other, with the leader themselves. Sometimes I think you want to get down to business, right? Good leaders are tasky leaders who get things done. But sometimes when we give people the opportunity to just get to know each other at the beginning of a meeting, or have time after the meeting to talk about follow-up, or what we're going to do over the weekend, those actually make a difference in terms of people feeling more connected to their team.
Sure.
It's a myth that the best team building comes from social. Social's good, keep doing social, but great team building also comes when we have people partner up on important tasks and shared responsibilities and roll up sleeves and do hard work together.
Yes.
So when team leaders can, share some of themselves and be vulnerable and ask people questions and check in with them so they're developing a relationship, when they give teams time to have a check-in at the beginning of the meeting, when they give team members opportunities to work on things together, those make a difference. Another thing that work team leaders can do to be really helping people find a level of happiness or create the conditions for happiness is to support them in their performance. When we perform well, when we feel like we've got the tools and clear expectations and alignment between what we are good at and what we're expected to do, when we feel like we can lean in, that really contributes to esteem and happiness. So when leaders can do those kinds of things to support people in their performance, it goes a really long way. So those are some of the things that leaders can do. And, nobody expects leaders to be perfect. We want to see leaders who are trying to make progress, who are trying to be better, who are learning along with us. But I think that's the same thing, right? Like, leaders can put a lot of pressure on themselves, and we can all put a lot of pressure on leaders. But when we give grace, like you were saying, that's also helpful.
Yeah, agreed. So I have two definitions that I want you to talk about real quick. And I think this goes with everything you're talking about and probably everything you've studied. Empathy and vulnerability.
Yeah, those are good.
Because those are very scary words for most leaders. And so can you give us just your impression, or not your impression, but what you would say, here's in a nutshell what these two mean and why they're not so scary, and maybe how you can practice them without becoming a mush, for lack of a better term,
Yeah, really.
Or sharing or oversharing, and let's face it, if you're a leader, you need to overshare.
Yeah.
So what, how would you sort of coach somebody on doing those two things well?
Yeah, that's such a great question. We just talked about this in a meeting I was in, and it's another nuanced topic, right?
Right.
Empathy is when we are really imagining what somebody else might be going through. So cognitive empathy, we're saying to ourselves, what might this person be thinking? Emotional empathy, we're saying to ourselves, what might this person be feeling? And we're curious about their situation and therefore valuing and attentive to what they might be going through, and then imagining what they might be going through. Empathy can be tricky if we over-identify and take on other people's pain. And that's the key. We can't do that, because then we can't be super helpful, right? So empathy is that imagining what somebody else might be thinking or feeling so that we can support them. And there's some discussion about what's sympathy, what's empathy, what's compassion. I think it's probably less important that we have exactly the right definitions, and more important how we behave. And so some people say, ooh, compassion is what moves empathy forward in terms of support. So whatever you call it, I think the next step is to say, hey, to listen, to be undistracted while you're listening, and then to offer support. And leaders say, oh my gosh, I'm not a social worker. I am so not trained in handling all the well-being issues today. That's scary. But I think we don't have to be social workers. We can offer support, we can offer resources, we can offer a listening ear. So that's how I think about empathy and how we can support people with empathy. And there's tons of research that empathy matters. Yes. When people feel like their leader is empathetic, they tend to be more innovative, they tend to perform better, they tend to stick around the organization, they tend to believe they have a better sense of work-life kind of navigation. There's lots of positive outcomes of empathy, in addition to feeling more fulfilled because we're building personal relationships. That makes a difference. Yeah. Vulnerability is really interesting, right? Vulnerability is when we share something about ourselves that could potentially be judged by the other person. Right. And vulnerability is a really key ingredient for building trust, because trust is built based on reciprocity. That's the way we all build trust. And interestingly, the human condition is to prefer trust. So I share a little bit about me, and then you share a little bit about you, and then we kind of, sometimes it ratchets up in terms of our level of trust. And when leaders are vulnerable, I think the important thing is it's not that they're kind of open kimono or TMI, but it is saying, look, I don't have it all figured out either. We are all figuring it out, and making room for other people to share, that they don't have it all figured out either. And so that willingness to be less than perfect together goes a long way in building the relationship. And this gets back to the empathy part. We're sensing other people's cues, right? We're asking questions, and maybe they want to talk about it and maybe they don't. And we're sharing something, and maybe they want to share back and maybe they don't. So we're letting people kind of set boundaries and make their own choices about how much they want to bring forward, but we're opening the door and we're asking questions to give people the opportunity. I don't know. That's how I think about it.
No, those were great answers. And I think you kind of need to break it down into something that's a little bit more tangible and, simple, because it's super important, like you said, they're the building blocks of trust. And, that's always seems to be this mythical term also, what does trust, really mean? Well, it means a lot of things, but basically it just means, that we have shared and, that we can actually, come together and feel like we've got each other, and
exactly.
I'm sure there's a much more technical definition that's out there, but that's kind of, what I think I would boil it down to. Yeah. But no, it's very helpful. I mean, I think any tools that we can give, to leadership, especially people coming up that, weren't leaders, we have the tendency to really reward those doers, into leading their teams. And, that's kind of a little pet peeve of mine. And, as a designer, nobody lets me get fully into that, a lot, but I see it. And we talk to enough people, and we do enough programming, interviewing that we see it. And it's something that really, bothers me, because they're not giving these skills. They're not training in empathy or vulnerability or, what this whole trust thing means. And so now they're just out here trying to figure out how they're going to continue to get their job done, manage these people, be their social worker. And they have no clue because nobody's training them, but they can. It's there, the training's there. So
yeah, it's a great point. I just wrote an article about this for Fast Company about how to figure out your way to leadership, even if you get no training and no development.
Oh, love it.
I talked to this leader in a real estate firm not too long ago, and this is so cool. He's super senior in his career and super successful. And he said, when I was really young in my first job, somebody told me, find the person in your firm who's really, really, really successful and do what they do. If they show up early for meetings, you show up early for meetings. If they wear a jacket, you wear a jacket. If they, thank people for sharing their opinion, you thank people for sharing their opinion, which I thought was really fun. I mean, he was really animated and talking about this. The really interesting thing is that really is how it works. We may not be thinking about it super consciously like he was, because he was even like, oh yeah, wear the shoes they wear and wear a jacket if they wear a jacket, whatever. It was
like a transitive mentoring.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. He was really great about it. But that is how it works. Even if we're not conscious of it,
sure,
that paying attention to people who are, doing it really well, who you super admire, that you're very, very grateful for, just focusing on what they're doing is a really great way to learn. And actually, I was having this conversation with somebody not too long ago. Sometimes you can be working around people who are not ideal, and that is also a good learning experience. What not to do, right? We all have.
Sometimes you need a little tip to know who to follow.
That's right. That's exactly right.
So, what's a good example, or do you have an example of a company that you've worked with in the past who's been able to shift, and make these changes? And how has that played out? And maybe what did they do that was really successful for them?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, culture is so overwhelming, right? There's that great bumper sticker that's something like, if you're not afraid, you're not paying attention, right?
Yes.
If you're not a little overwhelmed by culture and leadership and all that, then maybe you're not paying attention.
Right.
There was an organization that I worked with years ago. It was a philanthropic organization. And they hired a lot of people who were very, very hoity-toity and very accomplished in their careers with tons of credentials and tons of status. And many of them came with very big egos. And this company was okay with that because they really valued the status and the intelligence and the competence of these people in their areas of expertise. The problem they faced is that a lot of these people were kind of jerks. Yeah. They were not treating people well. They weren't demonstrating, respect for others. They weren't demonstrating the values of the organization. So the first thing the organization tried was they hired people that they considered to be really good at people skills to kind of be the first lieutenants to the people who were super credentialed. So they were supposed to kind of smooth the edges.
A buffer.
Yes, a buffer. That's exactly the right word.
They hired buffers.
So, now we talk about really that was
that's your strategy? Okay.
But that was the strategy.
Okay.
Well, they came to realize that wasn't working super well because they were losing people and morale was not as they wished it would be. So ultimately, they held a lot of those people accountable, not just for the results that they were driving, but for the way that they were behaving. And that made a huge difference. And they held people accountable for those results and the behaviors that went along with them in terms of pay, in terms of promotions, in terms of asking some people to find other opportunities outside of the organization. Wow. And that went a really long way to say, no, this is really what we care about. That was one of the things that they did. Another thing they did is they did development opportunities for everybody. So they did leadership development to the point you were making earlier, how can leaders continuously improve their skills and capabilities and attending to people and setting clear expectations and giving feedback and all of those important elements. And then they developed other members of the organization as well. So there was just they got to a real kind of learning and growth mentality as an organization. And the frosting on the cake, the thing they did that was the coolest, I mean, it was all coolest, right? But then they also brought in people who had benefited from the outcomes that the organization had produced. So people who had benefited from a philanthropic effort and clients who had changes in their life based on what this company had done. And it was really powerful stuff. They brought these people into, the cafeteria, and they'd have these, I think it was once a quarter, they would have somebody come in and talk about, the impact the organization had had. And that made such a difference for people to really connect with, I might be doing something that feels small every day, but it ladders up to something that's actually really big and that impacts on real human beings. And so they saw this shift in the culture where people were more motivated, people wanted to stay with the organization, people were providing more discretionary effort, people reported that they felt more engaged and more positive about their work. So, and the organization's outcomes and results increased as well, because it was less anymore about, the heroes, and it was more about, no, we all make a difference in terms of the outcomes that we're striving for.
Oh, that was a great example. And how ironic that a philanthropic organization like that would have a bunch of ego-driven jerks at the top.
I know, it was really
It
sad.
was very, the opposite of what they would ever want to do for, the beneficiary of the organization, right? So that's really unusual.
Exactly.
But that's a great example and, a very powerful one, actually. And I think it's just so important that the leadership, recognizes, those things. If that kind of thing is left unchecked, I mean, it can kind of run down the entire rest of the organization if they see that there's, that they're allowed to be that way. I think that's really important.
You're making me think one of my favorite quotes. It's stuck with me forever and ever. It's, a culture is significantly determined by the worst behavior it will tolerate. Isn't that good?
Yes. That is really good.
Yeah. So we gotta kind of do our best.
It makes you think about what you're allowing to happen in your organization.
I know, it's true.
That's really great. So that was a really great example, and this has been an awesome chat. I want to hear a little bit more about the book specifically, and you've had 2 versions of it, right? Can you walk us through a little bit about that? And it's the secrets to happiness at work.
Yeah.
So we've got lots of secrets that you're going to share in the book, right? And we're
right.
going to link the book in the show notes, and also make sure that people can get copies of it. But tell us some highlights about it, and what people can hope to glean from from reading that and going through that.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, my first book was called Bring Work to Life, and it looked at alternative ways to think of work-life balance. And this one's about how do we think about creating the conditions for happiness. Like, we don't have to wait for happiness to come to us. We don't have to believe that all happiness is kind of derived from a perfect situation or a perfect set of choices. So it's really about, like, how do you kind of empower yourself toward those conditions. And of course, your organization has responsibility, and leadership has responsibility, and society has responsibility, but we too can kind of step forward and think about how we create the conditions for happiness. So it talks about things like purpose, the things we talked about, purpose and growth and opportunities for connection, and ways that we choose gratitude, and ways that we think about really leaning in and performing to our best. But then it also, interestingly, the first version came out during COVID, and the publisher called and said, "Hey, we'd like to re-release this." So then I added to the content. So it's about double the length that it was before, double the content it was before, with a new cover and all that kind of good stuff. But I added things in terms of, like, identity, work and identity, and added information about self-care and how we think about self-care related to our work. And then I added some things about imposter syndrome and perfectionism and
those are good.
Professional courage, like topics that I just think are really, really interesting. Perseverance. So there's just some really fun additional nuggets there. And it's kind of never about chasing happiness for its own sake. That's actually negatively correlated with happiness. Like, we always think about, I need to be happy, or I should be happy, or I measure happiness, or I think about if I'm happy enough. And that's actually less correlated, and better that we think about creating the conditions. So how do we think about how we matter to others? How do we create great relationships? How do we look for opportunities for challenge? Those are the things that will bring us happiness, more so than just chasing it for its own sake.
That's a great concept. I'm sure that's a whole another unpacking episode that we could talk about that. But I love it, and I love the thought of that too. Like, not just happiness is not just for happiness' sake, and pursuing all the other things. And I think it's also got to be equally as important to be okay being in other states. That sometimes, like, to be I'm just I'm kind of meh, or, I'm kind of in a sad, era right now, but I know what I need to do to kind of, get through this, and, rather than just, nope, put on a happy face, right? Isn't that's probably what you're trying to convey, is like, don't just be happy.
That's right.
Don't fake it. It's not a fake it till you make it situation, is it?
That's exactly right. Yes, it's like we talked about, right? It ebbs, and happiness will ebb and flow. And you have to give yourself permission to not be happy every second. It doesn't mean you're doing it wrong if you're not happy every second. And
actually means you're doing life right,
yes,
if you have all of the emotions under it.
Right. I mean, the paradox of happiness is the hardest things are the things that make us most fulfilled. It's that really, really hard thing that we accomplished at work. It's that really, really amazing partnership or marriage that we've built that's been tough sometimes. It's the children who are part of our lives who we love deeply and who have, tested us, and we've learned through parenting, right? Those are wonderful challenges. And the happiness paradox is that the harder we work for something, the better we feel, the more fulfilled we feel when we accomplish it. So it's not about kind of easy street and being, happy every minute. Yeah. It's really healthy if we're pushing through and facing challenges.
And if you're doing it with somebody, then it's even more fulfilling, right?
Absolutely.
That's great. Thank you so much for coming and spending some time with me here at Cornet. And it's been great talking, and I'm sure we'll catch up again later. And I'm looking forward to looking at the new book to see how it compares.
This one's for you.
I love the other version too. It just was just a really nice read, and pictures, and but I will love to look into the new topics that you put in there and diving a little deeper into that. So
well,
great.
Thanks for having me. I super appreciate it.
No problem. Well, so tell us where we can find the book. We'll link it in show notes too, but just let you have a website, or how can we reach you? Where can we find you?
Thank you for asking. Yeah. Absolutely. Steelcase.com has tons of amazing, awesome research. TracyBrower.com. I've got lots and lots of research there. You can find The Secrets to Happiness at Work wherever books are sold.
Okay, good.
Amazon or whatever you want. And it comes in audio version and paperback, and also on Kindle or whatever digital device you like to read on. So thanks for asking. I appreciate it.
No problem. Go to Steelcase. I've always been a huge fan of Steelcase. I think they're one of the top, in terms of, furniture manufacturers and just thought leaders. They've always had some of the best white papers, and I'm a huge fan of the magazine and Chris and all of the things. Yes, I've been a big fan for a very long time.
Chris
so
and
that's
the whole
great.
Team do an amazing job.
Yeah.
Steelcase is not perfect. No company is.
No.
But I adore Steelcase, and I feel so fortunate to be able to contribute there.
Good people and great research, and this came out of it too, via you. So I love that.
Thank you.
So thanks again for coming, and thanks for joining us on the podcast today. And we'll put in the show notes what Tracy talked about here, and get you linked over to Steelcase, and we can find you on LinkedIn too, right? So we'll make sure that we have links to that too.
Awesome.
So
thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks.
Hey friends, if you enjoyed today's episode, please join in the conversation at Creative Place Podcast on LinkedIn or Instagram. And don't forget to subscribe. We're so glad you tuned in to Creative Place, and look forward to seeing you next time.